Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics. Hey gang, what's up? Just Ehren back with another committee video. There's so many of these. These conservatives and liberals do not like each other. You can tell in committee, guys. The committee meetings are just about as dysfunctional as question period is. It's a pageant, but my goodness, it's exciting every time. Here we're gonna watch another liberal get cut up by a conservative. That's the way that it seems it goes in these committee meetings, most of the time. Like, point of order, well, we'll see if there is one. This is a lot to watch, guys. Let's check it out.
The level of threats and misogyny I'm subject to both online and in person are such that I often fear going out in public, and that is not a sustainable or a healthy way to live. I've been verbally assaulted in the grocery store in my community with a man yelling, "F Trudeau, F you, you're going to jail for what you've done."
Mr. Chair, I want to begin by acknowledging the brave woman sitting beside me on this panel, MP PAM DAMOFF, who has done so much to bring the issue of harassment and threats of members of Parliament, particularly women, to the forefront of the conversation that is so critically important to speak about right now. And it's important because it is literally the core value of our democracy here as Canadians. Are we able to disagree without being disagreeable? Are we going to save what democracy looks like for our younger generations coming forward? If we are not able to stop the harassment of each other in the name of partisan politics, we are not going to survive as a democracy. Our next generation is going to be completely disengaged, disenfranchised, and will have no trust in democratic institutions at all. And I think that this is very, very vital for us to recognize.
First of all, I want to say, based on personal experience, that the type of language that you both have been subjected to by members of the public, it's unacceptable, right? I think that's something that we all can agree on. And I think the question now is, how do we move forward? So, as a member of the opposition, it is my job to hold the government to account. And so for me, when I come into the House of Commons sometimes, and I've asked the Prime Minister questions, I will state a fact that's in a report, and then he'll stand up in the House of Commons and say that I'm spreading misinformation. So how are we, because you've both had good suggestions. You've said that we need to allow for room for legitimate criticism of the government. But how can we do that when we have a Prime Minister who stands up over and over again, and many of the ministry as well, when there's a legitimate concern, rather than defending the policy, or it's just there's misinformation, Conservatives are spreading misinformation, and do you think that also degrades the environment that happens in question period that Ms. Khalid described?
Thank you for the question. And I remember a debate that you and I had, Ms. REMPLE Garner, some time ago in a late show. I think it was quite emotional for both of us talking about this very issue and how we could all rise above. And I think it's incumbent on every single one of us to frame our questions in a way that are respectful, but also frame answers in a way that's respectful. I feel like I always do try to do that. I'm not going to try and make this partisan about the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition, because I really want to talk about how we as individuals can rise above.
On that, I'm not going to get into tu quo cui here, like who did what. You didn't name a lot of people. I do think that I have not shared my experiences because I don't want that to be my Google search. I'm not saying that sharing the experience is invalid, but we need to drive to solutions here. And number one, I would just respectfully ask that, going back to your caucus, maybe say, like, when the opposition asks for information, the line, "that is misinformation," is not productive, one. Two, a lot of this has to do, a lot of me behind the scenes, and I don't want to share my experience publicly, but I've actually had scenarios where charges have been laid and somebody has been released on bail immediately and then disappeared. And then these were death threats. So I have to walk around wondering where this person is. Do you think bail reform to prevent, because we know that like online harassment, and it's not just us, it's every woman in the country, right? Like when the RCMP said MPs need more protection, I'm like, if they can't protect me, how do they protect everyone else? And we know that women see escalation in this type of violence. Do you think that the sort of catch and release policy that allows people where there's repeated harassment to just be released on bail, and then in some instances murder or commit violence against women, do you think that should be reformed?
If I may, first and foremost, through you, Chair, I acknowledge the hard work and the integrity of Ms. Rempel Garner. I know how much she goes through on a regular basis, and whether you can share it or not, I acknowledge it, and I'm very, very sympathetic towards it. I think the study of why we're here today is about the conduct between members of Parliament. And I think that it would be great if we could provide solutions on that specifically. And the one that I had proposed in my opening remarks.
On that, have either of you received or pressed charges for criminal harassment against any other member of Parliament?
No.
Okay. So then I think a lot of what I've heard and where this comes from is online harassment from the general public, bots, we don't know. So how do we get to a solution on that? Because frankly, I'm tired of the perpetual story I've had for 15 years, which is how do you live with violence against women in politics? I'm sure you both feel the same way. So let's go to solutions. I'm suggesting bail reform. I'd like to get in other areas as well, too, like the fact that repeated harassment, the government hasn't moved to look at any sort of way where repeated harassment, that there's no tools for law enforcement to perhaps get the identity of somebody online. It's a slow and onerous process that allows for escalation of violence. Do you have any solutions on this type of harassment, either bail reform or this, that the committee could consider?
So on that, I have made reports to the police, and when I have, on some occasions, I've been asked what I would like the police to do. On other occasions, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I was told it didn't rise to the level. So I do feel that there's a disconnect between what we received. I do want to make a comment, though, on serial harassers, that and I know the members from Alberta, I'm from Ontario. I will talk about Ontario. It's provincially appointed judges who are making bail decisions. Ontario jails are overrun, and judges are hesitant to send people to provincially, not federally run facilities. It's a complicated issue. We did bring forward a bill which was supported by all parties on bail reform, but I do think we should focus on what we can do as individuals on MP to MP harassment, and not, there are broader conversations to be had about the criminal justice system in general.
I just want to be clear with my two colleagues here. You aren't suggesting that the Liberal Party hasn't made statements that have agitated people in the past, right? You admit that's happened.
I think every MP needs to look at what they've done, Michelle. So I'm not going to say the Liberal Party, but I will say that there have been instances when individuals in my party have done things.
So I asked this to prove a point, because where we can't get to a point is, like, if you two aren't willing to say that the Liberals have not engaged in this behavior, I have been on the receiving end of what you have described, but but what your members have done. So what we can't get into when we're talking about solutions is pretending that one party is above scrutiny, right? And so to avoid that, I would suggest that the solutions need to be oriented towards using what is in law for criminal harassment, hate speech, and where there are gaps in that prevent not just us, any Canadian, from accessing justice or de-escalating these types of behavior, that we go there. Would you agree with that principle, that any forward solution on this can't be governed by a partisan body?
I absolutely agree.
Okay.
And in my remarks, I even said that it's not all conservative. And I can only, and my colleague can only speak to what we've experienced, Ms. Remple-Garneau. We can't speak to what you or Ms. Ferreri or anyone else has experienced. I can only speak about what's happened to me and the impact that has been a direct result of a Conservative MP. I can't speak to anything that anyone else has
But you
experienced.
wouldn't suggest that the Prime Minister is directly responsible for the harassment I've received, would you?
I've been trying to stay above the fray because I'm not getting into whether the opposition leader or the Prime Minister. I mean, if you want to go there, we can, but I really would prefer not to.
Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is that solutions have to be objective and not be governed by, and I have concerns that a code of conduct that would be governed by a partisan body or a quasi-partisan body wouldn't get to that point. So, for recommendations, would you support a recommendation, particularly going into the next federal election, where intimate images that are created by deepfake technology, that those types of images would be applied to the same criminal code sanctions that are in the criminal code right now for sort of traditional intimate images?
I'm not a lawyer, so I'll just give my own personal opinion. I know you've done a lot of work, a lot more than I have on AI and that type of thing, but absolutely.
Okay. The other thing I was thinking of was that there needs to be a mechanism by which, when there's repeated harassing behavior that has gotten to a point where, a court of justice sees or there's a summary conviction, that there's a clear instance of repeated harassment, that law enforcement should be able to go under some sort of an order and obtain the identity of somebody from a social media platform so that charges could be laid. Right now there's gray area in the law. Would you recommend something like that?
So when we, the Ethics Committee actually went to the RCMP last week and got a whole training session on their digital forensic, and that's an issue that they raised with us.
Okay, so we need some legislation on that. The other thing is, when there's clear instances of repeated harassing behavior online, and we're not talking about like a single mean tweet or something here, but like there's somebody who's clearly repeatedly harassing somebody, threatening, obscene, whatever the definition is, that there needs to be some sort of intervention available to the Court of Justice so that that person is directed to stop communicating with somebody. That doesn't exist right now. Would you recommend that that's something that the government should be looking into at this point in time?
Yes, and actually Julie Lalonde is a witness in the next panel. I think she'd be a good person to ask those questions to. She has a lot of experience on that.
Thank you. And again, like, the reason why I'm looking at objective solutions is that, I could sit here and talk about members of the Liberal Party that I've had to block on social media, but because they have sent hordes after me, right? I just think that if we get into a situation where we are censoring speech, particularly where we are saying the government's position is the positive position that needs to be uploaded, and that criticism of the government is downloaded in a legitimate situation, that we're doing democracy a disservice. I'm not saying there isn't a problem with what you and me and others have received. I'm just trying to look at objective solutions. So would you recommend in that scenario that we look at strengthening or closing loopholes that are in existing criminal justice laws that prevent law enforcement from intervening at early stages that allow this behavior to escalate into, hate speech, threats of violence, or actual violence.
Colleagues, just I've let that question go about 60 seconds over, so a quick response. I'm sorry to rush.
Yes.
Well, Ms. Damoff, that was exemplary in terms of quick. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ms. Rempel-Garner. Thank you very much to everybody. Ms. Ferreri, the floor will be yours for 5 minutes.
Thanks. Excuse me. Pardon my voice. Thank you for having me here today. Excuse me. And thank you to our two witnesses. It is certainly a story to be a person in politics and then add the woman in front of it. It is different. And, I appreciate the testimony. I've always joked. I said, imagine we started a mean tweets, like Jimmy Kimmel used to do, and we all, as MPs from every party, just read them. One of the things that it popped up, and my colleague really eloquently positioned this, and it's that legitimate criticism versus harassment. And I think there's a lot around that, because it is our job, as she has mentioned, in opposition, to ensure that we're holding that line and, people don't feel heard. And I guess one of the questions I would ask you is, a lot of those messages you read, in particular, Pam, they were, they were pretty graphic. They were from the public. They weren't from other members. But do you think those people that write those things are doing okay?
So they were sent to me, though, through you, Chair. They were sent to me as a result of the action of another member of Parliament. So it wasn't anything I had done. It wasn't necessarily policy related. But in answer to your question, though, I do think since the pandemic, I have found it's gotten much worse since the pandemic, and I do think that a lot of people are struggling with mental health and are struggling dealing with threats, whether it's to their health, to their safety, whether to what's going on around the world. So I do think that there are a lot of people, and I also want to say, too, that the vast majority of Canadians are good and decent people who do not treat other people in this way, but it's becoming more and more prevalent in society.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I think what people say online versus what they say to your face are very different. They're very, very different things. Just to retract then, so you're saying that those messages that you read into the record today, they were directly linked to an MP's comments? Or they were just random messages to you?
They came to, so look, I have had over my almost 9 years as an MP, thousands of just horrific messages. The examples I gave, though, most of them were the result of the actions of an MP posting something, which then resulted in a flood directly related to what that individual had posted.
Okay, thank you. I think sometimes, too, it is important to say policies. Like, I think sometimes there's policies that make people feel unheard or unseen, and I'm not excusing it. Listen, I'm on the same end. I have, criminal charges against people who've threatened to kill myself as well. But I think sometimes it's, to your point, if people don't feel heard, right? I think that is a piece of the puzzle, and Ms. Rempel-Garner touched on this greatly. And I would suggest that recommendation. The biggest thing I get told is nobody answers a question in question period, and people, and you have the worst food insecurity in history. You have you have a mental health crisis. You have suicide rates. You have all of these things, and I don't justify people's hateful behavior, but there's always a reason why somebody is doing what they're doing, and so I think, on a bigger scale, when we look at raising our children and knowing, you can't say that to somebody's face, so don't say it online, And so I think when we're making these recommendations, I think it is great to go back to sort of the criminal piece of it. One of the things that's come up a lot in my work is the Victims' Bill of Rights. A lot of people feel that criminals have more rights in this country than victims. And in 2020, there was an ask by the Office of the Federal Ombudsman for Victims of Crime asked for a parliamentary review of the Canadian Victims' Bill of Rights, citing top 4 issues that needed to be addressed. And it's never been addressed. It's never happened. And so I guess my question to you is twofold. Where do you see that? You know, should that be re-examined? Would you suggest something like that as well?
Can I share with you? So a couple of months ago, MP Michael Barrett had started a Facebook Live in which he had called my colleague and I corrupt, released our emails, etc., which led to a whole bunch of hate coming towards me, people calling, people emailing on social media, etc. But there was this one lady, Peggy. She drove 2 hours to my constituency office, and she was very, very upset, asking me why I was a corrupt individual. Why am I shutting down committees? Why am I not allowing investigations to happen? Why do I think it's okay for us to XYZ? I sat down with her. We had a conversation for about half an hour. And she gave me the biggest hug when she left. And I think to me that really proves a point. When I talk about the politics of agitation, it is that spreading or framing an issue in a way that really does agitate people, that makes them anxious. It adds an extra layer to whatever they're dealing with on a daily basis as it is. So I think that we as members of parliament have a responsibility to be more fair in how we engage in social media.
Sorry, so just to clarify, do you think the Victims' Bill of Rights needs to be amended?
So on that, I've got a meeting with the ombudsperson for the victims of crime. I've met with the office in the past. They reminded me that most people who are in jail are also victims of abuse. So, you know, I think any of our policies, whether it's the Victims' Bill of Rights or several other things that we deal with, it's always a good thing to take a look at them. But I think we need to bear in mind, you know, and if you've met with that individual, the ombudsperson, you'll know that they have a very balanced approach to victims.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics. So we're gonna wrap it up right there. What a crazy all these committee videos, guys, they are wild and crazy. They're fun to watch. Like, if you're an interested Canadian in federal politics, it's happening right here in committee all the time. We bring you as many videos as we can. Like, subscribe, share, get notified. We do a live show. It's fun. Come check that out. Check out one of the other videos that are floating around. That's gonna be fun too. That's it. Thank you for watching this one. We'll catch you at the next committee video. There's always something interesting to share as we learn about Canadian federal politics. Catch you next video.